Maya Santos leaned close to the billionaire's ear and whispered 5 words that made his blood run cold. Javier Santos was my father. His face turned ghostly pale as 15 years of buried secrets threatened to explode into the open. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. A single whispered sentence can change everything. For Maya Santos, a 26-year-old waitress carrying the weight of her sister's medical debt, that sentence was a name she never thought she'd speak again. For Alexander Harrington, a man who built an empire that touched the sky, it was the sound of his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. She was just trying to survive another shift. He was just another powerful man in an expensive suit. But when she recognized the face that had haunted her dreams for years, a dormant truth awake that threatened to expose the dark foundation beneath one of America's greatest fortunes. This isn't a fantasy of rags to riches. This is the story of how 5 whispered words in an upscale restaurant set fire to a legacy built on stolen dreams and buried secrets. The elegant dining room of La Maison glowed with warm amber light reflecting off crystal and polished silver. Maya Santos moved between tables with practiced grace, her black vest and crisp white shirt a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. She'd mastered the art of invisibility, present enough to anticipate needs, invisible enough to be forgotten between courses. On nights like this, when the restaurant brimmed with the murmur of important conversations and the soft clink of expensive flatware, Maya felt the weight of her dual existence most acutely. By day, she was a nursing student drowning in student loans. By night, she was a silent observer to the lives of the elite, collecting generous tips that barely made a dent in her sister Lucia's mounting medical bills. Table 12 has requested you specifically, Marcel, the floor manager said with a raised eyebrow. The Harrison party? Maya nodded, though her heart wasn't in it. Harrison meant finance. Finance meant loud, demanding men who saw her as furniture, but she needed the tips, so she straightened her shoulders and approached the corner table where 4 men in tailored suits were engaged in animated discussion. Gentlemen, she said with her professional smile firmly in place, I'll be your server this evening. May I start you with something from the bar? 3 of the men barely glanced up, rattling off drink orders without pausing their conversation. But the 4th man, seated with his back to the room in a position of subtle authority, fell silent. As he turned to face her, Maya's practiced smile froze on her face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The restaurant's ambient noise faded to a distant hum as she stared into the face she'd sworn she'd never forget. Older now, with streaks of silver at his temples and lines of authority etched around his mouth, but unmistakable. Alexander Harrington, founder and CEO of Harrington Global, 39 years old and worth billions. His face was on magazine covers and business school textbooks, and he had been the last person to see her father alive. Maya's hand trembled slightly as she wrote down the drink orders, fighting to maintain her composure. Alexander was studying her now, a slight furrow between his brows as if trying to place her face. Have we met before? He asked, his voice carrying the confident resonance of a man accustomed to being heard. Maya swallowed hard. I don't believe so, sir. I'll be right back with those drinks. She retreated to the bar, her mind racing. It had been 15 years since her father, Javier Santos, had gone to work as a night watchman at the Harrington construction site and never returned home. 15 years since the official report ruled it an accident. A tragic fall that no one witnessed. 15 years of her mother working herself to exhaustion to keep their family afloat. Of Lucia's illness consuming what little they managed to save. 15 years since a young Alexander Harrington had given a press statement expressing regret over the unfortunate incident before the story disappeared from the news cycle and life continued as if Javier Santos had never existed. Maya's hands shook as she placed the drinks on a tray. Her rational mind screamed at her to stay silent, to serve the table and collect her tips. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but the ghost of her father's smile haunted her along with the questions that had never been answered. The men barely acknowledged her as she distributed their drinks. They were deep in discussion about a development project, something about rezoning and displaced communities. Familiar territory for Harrington Global. Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes? Maya asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Give us 10, one of the men replied, dismissed. But Alexander Harrington was still watching her, that puzzled look deepening on his face. I'm sorry, he said, but I'm certain we've crossed paths before. Maya took a deep breath. The restaurant was crowded, the music just loud enough to cover a whispered exchange. Before her professional instincts could stop her, she leaned down as if to adjust something on the table and brought her lips close to Alexander's ear. My name is Maya Santos, she whispered. Javier Santos was my father. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Alexander Harrington's body went rigid, his face draining of color so rapidly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. The crystal tumbler in his hand froze halfway to his lips, amber liquid catching the light. His companions continued talking, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred between the billionaire and the waitress. Maya straightened, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'll check back in 10 minutes, she said to the table at large, then walked away on legs that threatened to buckle. In the service corridor, she pressed her back against the cool wall and fought for breath. What had she done? Years of carefully contained anger and grief had broken through in a moment of recklessness. She just whispered the name of her dead father into the ear of one of the most powerful men in the country, and Alexander Harrington had recognized it immediately. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of adrenaline and anxiety. When she returned to take the order, Harrington had composed himself, though his eyes followed her with an intensity that raised goosebumps on her skin. He barely touched his food, drinking 3 scotches in quick succession instead. His colleagues seemed to attribute his sudden quietness to the stress of their ongoing deal. As the dinner wound down and the other men headed for the door, Alexander remained seated, signaling for the check. Maya brought it with shaking hands, unsure what would happen next. Would he threaten her? Offer her money to keep quiet about whatever he knew? He signed the credit card slip without a word, adding a tip larger than Maya's weekly grocery budget. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Santos." Maya turned, her heart in her throat. "I'll be in the bar at the Greenwich Hotel tomorrow at 10 p.m., he said quietly. "Come alone if you want to know the truth." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and a business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. The night air was sharp with the promise of rain as Maya left La Maison 3 hours later. The streets of Lower Manhattan glistened under the streetlights, the late-night crowd thinning as Tuesday edged into Wednesday. She clutched her bag close, Alexander Harrington's card burning a hole in her pocket. The subway car was nearly empty as it rattled toward Brooklyn. Maya stared at her reflection in the dark window, seeing instead her father's warm eyes and easy smile. Javier Santos had been a gentleman who worked 3 jobs so his daughters could have opportunities he never did. The official story that he had been careless, that he had fallen from the unfinished 10th floor of what would become Harrington Tower, had never made sense to anyone who knew him. And now she knew that Alexander Harrington, the man whose name adorned the building that had taken her father's life, recognized the name Javier Santos, not as a statistic in a company accident report, not as a settled insurance claim, but as something that made his blood run cold at the mere mention. As Maya climbed the 5 flights to her apartment, her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "How was work? Did you make enough for my treatment this month?" Maya leaned against the stairwell wall, the weight of her sister's needs, her mother's exhaustion, and her own fading dreams pressing down on her. Then she thought of Alexander Harrington's pale face and the way his hand had trembled around his glass. The truth. After 15 years of questions, could she really walk away from the chance to find answers? Tomorrow at 10 p.m. she would find out exactly what Alexander Harrington knew about her father's death, and she would make him pay for the secrets he had buried along with Javier Santos. Maya unlocked her apartment door, determination hardening in her chest like concrete. The billionaire might have built his empire on silence, but she was about to make it crumble with the truth. Sleep evaded Maya that night. She lay awake, watching headlights trace patterns across her ceiling, the business card on her nightstand like a ticking bomb. By morning, doubt had crept in. Had she imagined his reaction? Was she projecting meaning onto a coincidence? Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Coming to see Lucia this afternoon. Doctor says new treatment showing promise." Maya's throat tightened. The new treatment was an experimental therapy not covered by insurance, $4,000 a month that they didn't have. She typed back a quick affirmative and rolled out of bed, Alexander Harrington's card falling to the floor as she moved. Kneeling to retrieve it, she studied the heavy card stock. The front bore only his name and title. Alexander Harrington, founder and CEO. Harrington Global. The back held 7 digits in precise handwriting. Not his main number. A private line. At the hospital, Lucia was propped up in bed, her once athletic frame diminished, but her smile still radiant. At 23, she should have been finishing her dance degree. Instead, the autoimmune disease that had ambushed her 2 years ago kept her tethered to IV poles and medication schedule. "You look terrible," Lucia said as Maya entered. "Another double shift?" "Something like that." Maya kissed her sister's forehead, setting down a paper bag. "Smuggled in those almond croissants you like." Their mother, Elena, looked up from her ever-present knitting, a nervous habit developed after her husband's death. Maya, the financial counselor, came by. "We need to decide about continuing treatment by Friday." The unspoken question hung in the air. Where would they find the money? "I'm handling it," Maya said with more confidence than she felt. "I have a potential opportunity." "Not another job," Elena sighed. "You're already working yourself to exhaustion." "It's just a lead," Maya said vaguely, avoiding her mother's searching gaze. Lucia reached for her hand. "Whatever it is, don't do anything crazy, okay? We'll figure something out together." Maya squeezed back, guilt churning in her stomach. What would they say if they knew she was planning to confront one of the most powerful men in New York, a man whose name was synonymous with ruthless business tactics and political influence? As evening approached, Maya stood before her small closet, indecision paralyzing her. What did one wear to meet the man who might be responsible for your father's death? She settled on black jeans and a deep blue blouse, practical enough to run if necessary, respectable enough to be taken taken seriously. The Greenwich Hotel exuded quiet luxury, its brick exterior unassuming compared to the modernist glass towers that dominated the Harrington portfolio. Maya's heartbeat accelerated as she crossed the understated lobby. The bar was a study in muted elegance, dark wood, amber lighting, leather chairs occupied by people who spoke in hushed, important tones. Alexander Harrington sat alone in a corner booth, a tumbler of scotch untouched before him. Without the performative confidence of his dinner companions, he seemed different, still commanding, but somehow more human. His eyes tracked her approach with a wariness that confirmed last night was no coincidence. "You came," he said as she slid into the seat across from him. Not a question, but something like relief colored his voice. "You recognized my father's name," Maya replied, dispensing with pleasantries. "Why?" Alexander signaled to a server who appeared instantly. "She have whatever she wants, and we're not to be disturbed, just water," Maya said. When the server retreated, she leaned forward. "I'm not here for hospitality, Mr. Harrington. I'm here for the truth." He studied her face for a long moment. "You look like him. Same eyes." The simple observation hit Maya like a physical blow. Few people remembered Javier Santos anymore, let alone what he looked like. "You knew my father personally," she said, realization dawning. "The official report said he was just another contractor. Anonymous." Alexander took a long breath. "Nothing about your father was anonymous." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder, placing it between. "Before we go further, I need to know what you remember about that night." "I was 11, Maya said, her voice tight. "Kissed me goodnight. Promised to help with my science project the next day. Then at 3 a.m., 2 police officers came to our door. They said he fell from the 10th floor, that no one saw it happen, and you never believed it," Alexander stated. "My father was meticulous about safety. He checked my bicycle helmet twice before letting me ride around the block. He wouldn't have fallen from anything." Alexander nodded, pushing the folder toward her. "You're right." Maya's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photograph of 2 young men in their early 20s. Arms around each other's shoulders, standing before a half-constructed building. With a jolt, she recognized her father, younger than she'd ever seen him in photos. The other man was unmistakably a young Alexander Harrington. "We were friends," Alexander said quietly. "More than friends. Partners." "That's impossible," Maya breathed. "My father was a night watchman, a recent immigrant working 3 jobs. When I met Javier, he was working as a security guard at Columbia University's engineering department, where I was a graduate student," Alexander explained. "But he was brilliant, self-taught in structural engineering. He had ideas about sustainable building materials that were decades ahead of their time." Maya stared at the photo, her world tilting sideways. "If you were friends, why didn't you come to his funeral? Why didn't you tell us this?" Alexander's face darkened. "Because by then I was being controlled by people who wanted Javier erased from the narrative. My father and his board of directors." The server returned with Maya's water. She barely noticed, her attention fixed on the documents as Alexander continued. "Harrington Global was my father's company then. When I graduated, he gave me my first project, the tower on West 53rd. I brought Javier in as a consultant. We worked on the designs together, incorporating his innovations." Alexander's voice grew strained. "When my father saw the final plans, he recognized their brilliance. Quote, when he learned who was behind them, ... he didn't want an immigrant getting credit," Maya finished, bitterness lacing her words. "It was worse than that. The sustainable materials Javier proposed would have cut into relationships with my father's suppliers, longtime cronies who overcharged and underdelivered. There was too much money at stake." Maya's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of a story that had shaped her entire life without her knowledge. "So what happened that night?" Alexander's eyes grew distant. "My father called an emergency board meeting. They offered to buy Javier at a pittance compared to what the patents were worth. He refused." He looked down at his hands. "I should have stood with him, but I was young, afraid of my father. I tried to convince Javier to take the deal, and he wouldn't," Maya said, a surge of pride cutting through her confusion. "He said some things are worth more than money. That night he went to the construction site to collect his personal research. My father sent 2 men from his security team to ensure he left with only his belonging." Maya felt cold dread spreading through her chest. It wasn't an accident. Alexander met her gaze directly. "No, it was not." Single quotes. The world seemed to narrow to this moment, this truth that had been buried for 15 years. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "They killed him. There was a confrontation. Javier threatened to go public with proof that my father had attempted to steal his work. One of the men panicked." Alexander's voice cracked. "By the time I got there, it was too late." "They had staged it to look like an accident." "And you said nothing," Maya said, rage building in her like a gathering storm. "You let them get away with murder." "I was a coward," Alexander admitted, no defense in his voice. "My father made it clear that if I spoke up, I would be implicated too. I'd lose everything, go to prison, and it wouldn't bring Javier back. So instead, you built your empire on my father's grave." Maya spat. "Those innovations, his innovations, made you billions while my mother worked herself to the bone. While my sister..." She broke off, tears threatening. "Your sister is ill," Alexander finished, surprising her. "Lupus diagnosed 2 years ago. Currently participating in an experimental treatment program at Mount Sinai that insurance won't cover." Maya went still. "You've been watching us," From a distance. Through a foundation I set up anonymously. He pulled out his phone, opening a banking app. Every month for 15 years, I've set aside a percentage of profits from any building that used Javier's designs. It was meant to be his legacy fund, to go to his family when the truth could finally come out. He turned the screen toward her. The number displayed made Maya's breath catch. "This doesn't absolve me," Alexander said. "Nothing could. But tomorrow my father is announcing his retirement. Control of the company transfers to me." His eyes held a determination that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to publicly acknowledge Javier's conscience. Establish a scholarship in his name and make sure his innovations are properly attributed." "Why now?" Maya demanded. "After 15 years of silence? Because my father is dying. His threats no longer have power. And because you found me." Alexander's gaze was steady. "I've lived with this guilt every day. When you whispered his name in my ear, it was like he had reached across time to demand justice." Maya sat back, overwhelmed. The truth was both worse and more complicated than she had imagined. The photograph of her father, young, alive, brilliant, blurred through her tears. "What happens next is your choice," Alexander said quietly. "You can go public with what I've told you. I won't stop you. Or you can let me make this right, starting with your sister's treatment and your mother's security." Maya looked at him. This man who had been both villain and silent guardian in her story. The choice before her was impossible. Justice that might destroy lives or compromise that would save her sister. "I need time to think," she finally said, gathering the folder with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "And I'll need proof of everything." Alexander nodded. "I have it all. When you're ready." He wrote another number on a napkin. "This is my private line. No assistants, no gatekeepers. Just me." As Maya stood to leave, he added softly, "He would be proud of you, you know. You have his courage." The words followed her into the night, echoing in her mind as she clutched the folder containing the truth that had been hidden for 15 years and the impossible decision she now had to make. Dawn broke over Brooklyn, pale light filtering through Maya's thin curtains. She hadn't slept. The folder lay open on her kitchen table, its contents spread in a constellation of revelations. Photos of her father and Alexander working together. Preliminary sketches of building designs with both their handwriting in the margins. A copy of the original patent application with Javier Santos listed as co-inventor, later amended to remove his name. And most damning of all, an internal memo from Richard Harrington to the board, dated the day before her father's death. "The Santos situation has been handled. All trace of his involvement is to be expunged from company records." Maya's hands shook as she gathered the documents back into the folder. The truth was both vindicating and devastating. Her father hadn't been careless. He hadn't been just another anonymous worker. He had been brilliant, innovative, and ultimately murdered for it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcel at La Maison. "No call, no show last night." An explanation? Reality crashed back. In the shock of meeting Alexander, she'd forgotten her evening shift. She quickly typed back an apology about a family emergency, promising to work a double to make up for it. Marcel's response was terse. "Don't let it happen again." The next text was from the hospital billing department. "Payment due for continued treatment. Please contact financial services." Maya pressed her palms against her eyes. The weight of her sister's illness, her mother's exhaustion, and now this buried truth threatened to crush her. Alexander's offer hovered in her mind: immediate financial relief, proper credit for her father, a chance for justice without destruction. It would be so easy to accept. Too easy. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. Santos' law office, answered a crisp female voice. "I need to speak with Carmen Santos," Maya said. "Tell her it's her cousin Maya." 5 minutes later, Carmen's authoritative voice filled the line. "Maya, is Lucia worse?" "No, it's not that. I need your professional advice. Can you meet me?" An hour later, Maya sat across from her cousin in a small cafe near Carmen's downtown office. Though only 5 years older, Carmen had always seemed from another world, confident, polished, successful. The daughter of Javier's brother, she had attended law school on scholarships and clawed her way into a respected position at a civil rights firm. Maya pushed the folder across the table. "I need you to look at this. All of it." Carmen raised an eyebrow but opened the folder. As she read through the documents, her expression transformed from professional detachment to stunned disbelief, and finally to cold fury. "Where'd you get this?" she demanded, voice low and intense. Maya told her everything. The encounter at La Maison, the meeting with Alexander, his confession and offer. Carmen leaned back, legal mind visibly processing. "This is ... explosive, corporate conspiracy, wrongful death, patent theft, evidence tampering." She looked at Maya sharply. "With this evidence and Harrington's testimony, we could file charges, civil and criminal. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on all of it." "What would that mean?" "Practically speaking, it would be David versus Goliath. Harrington Global has an army of lawyers and virtually unlimited resources." Carmen's eyes gleamed with the fight she clearly wanted. "But with these documents and Alexander's cooperation, we could win. It would be a landmark case, and if Alexander decides not to cooperate, these documents alone are damning. We could subpoena him." Carmen studied Maya's face. "You're hesitating. Why?" Maya stared into her coffee. "Lucia's treatment, Mom's future. Their security. She looked up. If we go public, it becomes a legal battle that could take years. Meanwhile, Lucia needs help now, so take his money, Carmen said bluntly. Then we file anyway, it doesn't work that way. He'd want agreements signed. Carmen's expression hardened. You're considering letting them get away with murder. Your father's murder. The words hung between them, sharp and accusatory. I'm considering all options, Maya said quietly, including what my father would want for his family. Uncle Javier would want justice. Would he want Lucia to suffer for it? Maya countered. Carmen had no answer for that. She carefully gathered the documents back into the folder. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But Maya, her gaze intensified, don't trust Alexander Harrington. No matter how remorseful he seems now, he chose silence for 15 years. People like that don't change. Maya nodded, the warning settling heavily in her chest. As they parted outside the cafe, Carmen hugged her fiercely. Give me copies of everything, just in case. The hospital corridor seemed longer than usual as Maya made her way to Lucia's room that afternoon. Her mind kept returning to Alexander's words. He would be proud of you. Would he, though? Would her father be proud of her considering a compromise with the family responsible for his death? She found her mother asleep in the recliner beside Lucia's bed, knitting needles fallen to her lap. Lucia was awake, scrolling through her phone. Hey, Maya said softly, setting down her bag. How's today? Better than yesterday, Lucia offered a wan smile. They adjusted my meds. The financial counselor came back, though. Mom pretended to be asleep then, too. Maya glanced at Elena's exhausted face, the web of wrinkles that had deepened over years of worry. I might have a solution, Maya said, sitting on the edge of the bed. For the treatment costs. Lucia's eyes widened. You didn't do anything illegal, did you? Despite everything, Maya laughed. No, it's complicated. I found out some things about Dad's death. Lucia went still. What things? Maya hesitated. How much should she share? The truth would burden Lucia with knowledge she couldn't act on in her condition. It turns out he was working on a project that was more significant than we knew. There might be compensation owed to us. After all this time? That sounds suspicious. It's legitimate, Maya assured her, but I need to decide how to proceed. Lucia studied her sister's face. There's something you're not telling me. Maya looked down at their joined hands, her own strong and calloused from work. Lucia's thin and mapped with veins from constant access. I need to make a choice, Maya admitted, between a settlement that would help us now or a fight for the full truth that might take years. Understanding dawned in Lucia's eyes. And you're afraid that taking the quick solution betrays Dad somehow? Maya nodded, throat tight. Maya, Lucia said gently, Dad loved us more than anything. More than pride, more than recognition. Do you remember what he used to say? La familia es la única verdad que importa. Family is the only truth that matters, Maya translated the familiar phrase, awakening memories of her father's voice. Whatever happened to him, whatever choice you make now, he would want us to survive, to thrive. Lucia squeezed her hand. That doesn't mean the truth doesn't matter. It just means timing matters too. Maya looked at her sister, so wise despite her youth, so strong despite her illness, and felt a moment of clarity. There might be a third path, one that honored both her father's legacy and his love for his family. I need to make a phone call, she said, standing up. Rest. I'll be back soon. In the hospital garden, Maya dialed the number Alexander had given her. He answered on the first ring. I've been waiting to hear from you, he said, tension evident in his voice. I have conditions, Maya said without preamble. Non-negotiable ones. I'm listening. First, my sister's treatment is funded completely, regardless of what follows. Done, Alexander agreed immediately. I've already made arrangements with Mount Sinai. They're expecting full payment tomorrow. Maya's breath caught. He'd been that certain she would accept, or that desperate to atone. Second, you will publicly acknowledge my father's contributions as promised. Full credit. His name on buildings where his innovations were used. Yes, I've drafted the announcement for next week's press conference. Third, Maya continued, her voice hardening, there will be consequences for the men directly responsible. I don't care how old they are now. They will face justice. A pause. That's complicated. One of them died years ago. The other is still on the board. Then he resigns, publicly with a full admission. Longer silence. I'll make it happen. But it will take time. Corporate politics. No excuses. Maya cut him off. You've had 15 years of excuses. You're right, Alexander conceded. It will be done. And finally, Maya said, the most crucial demand last. You will establish the Javier Santos Foundation for Sustainable Architecture with a minimum endowment of $50 million. It will provide scholarships for immigrant students in engineering and architecture. And I will sit on the board with full oversight. This time, the silence stretched so long, Maya thought he might refuse. That's ... substantial, he finally said. So was my father's contribution to your fortune, Maya replied coldly. And his life. Agreed, Alexander said, his voice carrying new respect. I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. No. My cousin is a lawyer. She'll draw up the terms. Your lawyers can review them, but the agreements will be drafted on our side. Your cousin, Carmen Santos. It wasn't a question. I should have anticipated that. She's built quite a reputation. Maya wasn't surprised he knew of Carmen. Do we have a deal? We do. He paused. Maya, for what it's worth, You've handled this with more grace than I had any right to expect. This isn't grace, Mr. Harrington. This is justice, tempered with necessity. Don't mistake one for the other." As she hung up, Maya watched a young family walking through the garden, parents swinging a laughing child between them. Her father had been robbed of those moments with no amount of money or recognition could restore what had been taken. But perhaps, in ensuring her family's security and her father's legacy, she could build something meaningful from the ruins of the past. Not a perfect justice, but a practical one. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Transfer to hospital complete. Treatment authorized indefinitely." Maya closed her eyes, feeling the first weight lifting from her shoulders. One battle won, many more to go. She turned back toward the hospital entrance, ready to tell her mother and sister that their immediate worries, at least, were over. The rest, the public recognition, the consequences, the foundation, would come with time. For now, La Familia was secure. Her father would understand. News of Lucia's miraculous financial clearance spread through the hospital floor like a hopeful whisper. Nurses who had grown fond of the young dancer smiled knowingly at Maya, assuming a wealthy benefactor or insurance reversal. Only Dr. Patel, Lucia's primary physician, approached Maya directly in the hallway outside her sister's room. "I don't ask questions about financial miracles," she said quietly, checking that they weren't overheard. "But whoever made this happen, the authorization covers everything. Experimental treatments, private room, physical therapy, home care. It's the kind of coverage I've only seen for ... single quote." She hesitated. "For billionaires?" Maya finished. Dr. Patel gave her a measured look. "Just know that I'd been instructed to provide updates on her progress to a foundation representative. Patient confidentiality still applies, but they'll be monitoring her case close." "That's fine," Maya assured her. "It's all above board." As Dr. Patel walked away, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Drafting documents. Need to meet Asapi." The next morning found Maya in Carmen's office, surrounded by stacks of legal papers and two associates Carmen had pulled in for what she called the case of a lifetime. "We're structuring this as 3 separate agreements," Carmen explained, sliding documents across her desk. "First, the medical trust for Lucia, revocable, with guaranteed funding regardless of what happens with the other agreements." Maya nodded, relieved that her sister's care was secured. "Second, a settlement agreement for the wrongful death claim and intellectual property theft. This includes financial compensation, public acknowledgement of Javier's contributions, and the removal of parties responsible for his death from Harrington Global. And the foundation? That's the third agreement. Separate entity, endowed as you specified, with oversight provisions that prevent Harrington from controlling the narrative." Carmen's eyes gleamed with professional satisfaction. "I've added clawback provisions if they fail to honor any part of the agreements." Maya scanned the dense legal language, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. "When do we present these?" "Harrington's attorneys have requested a meeting tomorrow at their offices. They're moving with unusual speed, because Alexander wants this resolved before his father's retirement announcement," Maya said. Carmen's expression turned shrewd. "Exactly. Which gives us considerable leverage." She hesitated, then added, "Maya, there's something else you should know. I did some digging into the current board member who was involved in your father's death, James Westbrook." The name meant nothing to Maya. "What about him?" "He's Richard Harrington's brother-in-law, Alexander's maternal uncle." Carmen handed her a photograph of an older man with sharp features and cold eyes. "Not just a board member. He's family." Maya felt a chill. The complication was significant. Would Alexander truly hold his own uncle accountable? "There's more," Carmen continued. "I have a contact at the SEC. Apparently, there's a quiet investigation into Harrington Global's accounting practices. Nothing public yet, but you think this is related?" "I think nothing about the Harringtons is simple." Carmen gathered the documents. "We go in prepared for resistance. The foundation and medical trust are our non-negotiables. Everything else is leverage." Maya nodded, the weight of what lay ahead settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about systems of power and the lengths people would go to protect. Her phone lit up with a message from Alexander. "Board emergency meeting called. Some resistance forming. Nothing I can't handle. Still on for tomorrow." She showed Carmen, who raised an eyebrow. "Interesting that he's keeping you informed. Either he's genuinely on your side or he's managing your expectations. Or both," Maya said quietly. That evening, Maya returned to work at La Maison for the first time since the fateful night. Marcel gave her a cold look but said nothing about her absence. The familiar rhythm of the restaurant, taking orders, delivering food, the soft clink of glasses, felt surreal after the seismic shifts in her personal life. As she cleared a table, she glanced up to see a man watching her from the bar, mid-50s, expensively dressed with a predatory stillness that raised her hackles. When he caught her eye, he smiled thinly and raised his glass in a silent toast. Maya looked away, unsettled. Minutes later, he was gone, but a business card remained on the bar. She picked it up, her blood chilling at the name, James Westbrook, Executive Vice President, Harrington Global. Her hand shook as she slipped the card into her pocket. A message had been delivered. I know who you are. The next day, Maya and Carmen arrived at Harrington Tower 15 minutes early. The security desk already had their names and they were whisked to the top floor in a private elevator. Alexander waited for them in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the Manhattan skyline, a panorama that would have awed Maya under different circumstances. Miss Santos, Miss Santos. Alexander nodded to each of them, professional and restrained. My attorneys will join us shortly. Your uncle paid me a visit last night, Maya said without preamble. At the restaurant. Alexander's composed expression faltered. Westbrook came to La Maison? He didn't speak to me, just made sure I saw him. Alexander's jaw tightened. I apologize. That won't happen again. Is this going to be a problem? Carmen asked pointedly. Our agreements specifically require his removal from the board and a full accounting of his role in Javier's death. It won't be a problem, Alexander stated, though a muscle worked in his cheek. Though it may explain why my father insisted on attending today's meeting. Maya and Carmen exchanged glances. Richard Harrington's presence changed the dynamic significantly. We'll proceed as planned, Carmen said firmly. The door opened and a team of attorneys filed in, followed by a silver-haired man whose bearing radiated authority despite his evident frailty. Richard Harrington walked with a subtle limp, his complexion sallow beneath his tan, but his eyes were sharp and calculating as they assessed Maya. So, he said, his voice surprisingly strong, this is Javier's daughter. The room fell silent. Alexander looked alarmed, clearly not expecting his father to address Maya directly. Yes, Maya replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I am. Richard smiled without warmth. You have his determination. I see it in your eyes. He turned to Alexander. You should have told me she'd found you. This is my initiative, Alexander said. I'm handling it, evidently. Richard took a seat at the head of the table, a position he clearly still considered his by right. Well, let's see these agreements your lawyers have been so frantically reviewing. Carmen slid copies across the table. For several tense minutes, silence reigned as Richard skimmed the documents, occasionally raising an eyebrow or frowning slightly. $50 million for the foundation is excessive, he finally said. It's non-negotiable, Maya replied. Everything is negotiable, Miss Santos. Richard's tone was patronizing. That's lesson one in business. This isn't a business negotiation, Maya said evenly. This is the price of 15 years of silence about my father's murder. Richard didn't flinch at the word murder. Instead, he looked almost appreciative of her directness. You know, he said conversationally, your father was the most stubborn man I ever met. Brilliant, yes, but unwilling to understand practical reality. If he had just taken the initial offer, Dad, Alexander cut in sharply. That's enough, is it? Richard's gaze moved between his son and Maya. I wonder if Miss Santos understands what she's really asking for. Public acknowledgement means public scrutiny of everything and everyone involved. His eyes settled on Maya with disturbing intensity. Including your father's background. What are you implying? Carmen demanded. Only that history is rarely as simple as we wish it to be, Richard replied smoothly. Javier Santos had his own secrets, ones that might tarnish the legacy his daughter is so eager to establish. Maya felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. What secrets? Dad, stop, Alexander warned. This isn't the approach we agreed on. Richard ignored it. Did you never wonder how a supposedly self-taught immigrant became so knowledgeable about advanced architectural engineering? Where those innovative designs really came from? Are you actually suggesting my father stole his own work? Maya asked incredulously. I'm suggesting there's more to the story than a simplistic narrative of victim and villain. Richard closed the folder. Perhaps we should all take time to consider what full disclosure actually means before proceeding. Carmen leaned forward. If you're threatening my client, not at all, Richard said mildly. Just ensuring everyone understands the stakes. He stood with effort. I'll leave you to the details. Alexander knows my concerns. He moved toward the door, then paused beside Maya. You seem like a practical young woman. Consider what your father would truly want. Posthumous recognition bought with family secrets neither of you may wish exposed. After he left, the tension in the room remained palpable. Alexander looked troubled, while the Harrington attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. What was that about? Maya demanded. What secrets is he talking about? I don't know, Alexander admitted. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Carmen's expression was skeptical. Convenient. It's a bluff, Alexander insisted. A negotiating tactic. My father sees everything as a game to be won. Or he knows something you don't, Maya said quietly. The meeting proceeded, with attorneys haggling over details, but Maya's mind kept returning to Richard's insinuations. What if there were aspects of her father's life she didn't know? Could Richard Harrington actually have information that would change how she saw her father? As they prepared to leave, agreements tentatively approved pending final review, Alexander caught Maya's arm. Don't let him get in your head, he said soft. That's his specialty. Maya pulled away. Is there anything about my father I should know? Anything that might come out when this goes public? Alexander hesitated just long enough to plant a seed of doubt. Not that I'm aware of, but Maya, everyone has parts of their past they keep private. Even the best people. Especially the best people, she countered, because they're the ones with something to lose. As she and Carmen rode the elevator down, Maya felt the certainty that had guided her beginning to fracture. What if her father wasn't exactly thought? What if there were complications to his story that she wasn't prepared to face? He's manipulating you, Carmen said, reading her expression. Classic intimidation tact. But what if he's not? Maya whispered. What if there's something I don't know? The elevator doors opened to the lobby where a news crew was setting up for what appeared to be an impromptu press conference. Richard Harrington stood at the center, looking remarkably energized compared to his appearance upstairs. Maya and Carmen hung back, watching as Richard began speaking to the assembled reporters. Harrington Global has always been committed to innovation and integrity, he was saying, which is why I'm pleased to announce a new initiative recognizing the contributions of our many talented collaborators throughout our history. Maya's blood ran cold. Richard was co-opting their agreement, twisting it to serve his own narrative before the ink was even dry. The first battle had been joined, and Richard Harrington had just made the opening move. Whatever secrets he claimed to hold about her father, he was clearly prepared to use them. The question was, did they actually exist? Or was it all an elaborate bluff? Maya squared her shoulders. She was about to find out. Richard Harrington's press conference sent shockwaves through Carmen's carefully constructed strategy. By announcing a vague recognition initiative for past collaborators, he had preemptively diluted the impact of their planned revelation about Javier Santos. It was a masterful corporate move, acknowledging just enough to seem progressive while admitting nothing specific. He's trying to control the narrative, Carmen fumed as they left Harrington Tower, making it sound like your father was just one of many contributors rather than the primary inventor whose work was stolen. Maya barely heard her. Her mind was fixated on Richard's insinuations about her father's secrets. What could he have possibly meant? Her entire life, Javier Santos had been the moral center of their family. Honest, hardworking, principled. We need to counter immediately, Carmen was saying, already on her phone. I have contacts at the Times and... Not yet, Maya interrupted. I need to know what he was talking about first. About my father. Carmen lowered her phone. Maya, it's almost certainly a bluff. A classic tactic to make you hesitate. Then proving it's a bluff should be easy. Maya's jaw set with determination. But I need to be certain. Back in Brooklyn, Maya knelt before her mother's ancient cedar chest, a repository of family documents and mementos. Elena watched from the doorway, concern etched on her face. What are you looking for, Mia? She asked softly. Mia hesitated. She hadn't told her mother everything yet, just that there was potential recognition and compensation for Javier's work. The full truth about his murder would devastate Elena anew. Dad's papers, Maya said. Anything about his life before he met you? Elena's expression shifted subtly. Why now, after all these years? Something came up about his work. I just want to understand his background better. Elena studied her daughter for a long moment before nodding slightly. There's a metal box at the bottom. It has his personal documents from before we came to New York. Maya found it beneath old photo albums and baptismal certificates. A dented tin box secured with a simple clasp. Inside were yellowed papers in Spanish, a faded university ID from a technical institute in Mexico City, and several letters addressed to Javier from someone named Carlos Vega. Who's Carlos Vega? Maya asked, showing her mother one of the letters. Elena's expression softened with recognition. Carlos was your father's mentor in Mexico. A brilliant engineer who took Javier under his wing when no one else would give him a chance. She sat beside Maya, taking the letter. Carlos had revolutionary ideas about sustainable building materials, but he was old and in poor health. He taught Javier everything he knew. Maya's heart quickened. His ideas, did Dad build on them? Use them in this work here? Of course, Elena said as if it were obvious. Carlos encouraged him to take their shared research to America where there would be more opportunities. He died shortly before we emigrated. She looked troubled. Why are you asking this, Maya? What's really happening? Before Maya could formulate a response that wouldn't worry her mother, her phone buzzed with a message from Alexander. We need to talk, privately. It's about Carlos Vega. The name on her screen sent a jolt through Maya. How did Alexander know about Carlos? I have to go, she told her mother, gathering the letters. Can I borrow these? Elena nodded slowly. Maya, your father was a good man. Whatever you're searching for, remember that. An hour later, Maya sat across from Alexander in a quiet corner of a small cafe in Chelsea neutral territory. His face was drawn with fatigue, but his eyes were alert. How do you know about Carlos Vega? Maya demanded without preamble. Alexander slid a folder across the table. Because my father ordered a complete background investigation on your father in 1968 when they first started working together. Standard procedure, he claimed. The report focused heavily on Carlos Vega. Maya opened the folder to find a comprehensive dossier on Carlos Vega academic credentials, publications, and a final notation. Deceased, 1967. Cause, heart failure. No surviving family. Carlos was my father's mentor, Maya said carefully. I know, Alexander replied, and my father is attempting to use that relationship to discredit Javier's contributions, to suggest that the innovations weren't originally his. Maya felt a surge of indignation. Of course they were influenced by his mentor. That's how knowledge works. That doesn't make them any less my father's work. I agree, Alexander said quickly, but my father will twist it. Will claim Javier was passing off someone else's ideas as his own. That's ridiculous. My father never hid his connection to Carlos. Did he explicitly credit Carlos in his designs at Harrington Global? Maya hesitated, realizing she didn't know. Would he have needed to? Technically, yes. Alexander looked genuinely regretful. All sources of inspiration or prior art should have been documented in the initial proposal. If he didn't mention Carlos Vega ... then your father will use it to paint him as a fraud, Maya finished, strategy becoming clear, making it look like both sides were guilty of something. Alexander nodded grimly, creating enough moral ambiguity that the public loses interest in who was right or wrong. It's his favorite tactic. Maya's mind raced. Her father's relationship with Carlos was clearly mentorship and collaboration, not theft, but proving that distinction after 15 years with both men dead would be nearly impossible. There's more, Alexander said quietly. The investigation suggests Carlos Vega may have had political connections that were controversial at the time. What kind of connections? He was allegedly involved with leftist movements in Mexico during the 1950s. Nothing violent, but enough to raise eyebrows in corporate America during the Cold War era. The implication was clear. Richard would not only question the originality of Javier's work, but potentially paint him as politically radical by association, a smear that would still resonate in certain circles. This is absurd, Maya said, anger building. Your father's going to assassinate my father's character to protect himself from accountability for actual murder. Yes, Alexander stated bluntly. He will, and he'll use his considerable influence to make it stick unless we find a way to preempt him. Maya studied Alexander's face, searching for deception. Why are you telling me this? Whose side are you really on? I told you from the beginning I want to make this right. I've lived with this guilt for 15 years. His expression hardened, and I'm tired of my father's tactics. This company was built on Javier's innovations, not on my father's ability to bury inconvenient truths. Maya wasn't entirely convinced. You could have warned me about this earlier. I didn't know about Carlos Vega until my father mentioned it. I've been digging through company archives since the meeting. Alexander ran a hand through his hair. My father keeps certain information compartmentalized, even from me. Their conversation was interrupted by Maya's phone ring. Carmen, turn on NY1 right now, her cousin said without greeting. Alexander's phone buzzed simultaneously. His face paled as he read the message. They found a television at the bar where breaking news showed James Westbrook at a podium, Richard Harrington standing supportively at his side. Single quotes ... deeply regret the tragic accident that took Javier Santos's life, Westbrook was saying with practiced solemnity. While I was not personally present that night as head of security at the time, I take full responsibility for the inadequate safety measures that led to his fall. Harrington Global has established a victims' compensation fund to address this and similar incidents from our past. Maya watched in stunned silence as the narrative of her father's murder was being neatly repackaged as a workplace accident, a tragedy of negligence rather than an intentional act. They're getting ahead of us again, Carmen said through the phone. They'll position any evidence we bring forward as grieving family members unable to accept a tragic accident. Alexander's expression was thunderous. This wasn't the plan. Westbrook was supposed to resign in disgrace, not position himself as a remorseful executive taking corporate responsibility. Your father outmaneuvered you, Maya said, the realization sinking in. He never intended to honor our agreement. I can still make this right, Alexander insisted. The foundation, Lucia's treatment, those are already in motion. They can't reverse them. But my father's true legacy, the recognition of what was done to him, the actual accountability, Maya's voice rose. Those are being erased in real time. Her phone buzzed with another call. Her mother. Maya, there are reporters outside her apartment, Elena said, her voice trembling. They're asking about your father's connection to radical groups in Mexico. What is happening? Maya closed her eyes, feeling the situation spiraling out of control. Mom, don't talk to them. Don't let them in. I'm coming home now. As she ended the call, Alexander caught her arm. Maya, wait. We need to coordinate our response. She pulled away. My family's being harassed because of your father's tact. This is exactly what Carmen warned me about. I didn't know he would do this, Alexander said, his composure cracked. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything you say anymore, Maya replied coldly. Your family has been lying about mine for 15 years. Why stop now? As she turned to leave, Alexander called after her. What are you gonna do? Maya paused at the door, a new resolution hardening within her. What my father would have done. Tell the truth, the whole truth, no matter who it hurts. The taxi ride to Brooklyn gave Maya time to think. Richard Harrington had underestimated her, assuming she would retreat when faced with his counterattack. He didn't understand that for 15 years she had lived with unanswered questions about her father's death. Now that she knew the truth, no amount of corporate spin could force her back into silence. When she arrived at her family's apartment building, a small cluster of reporters waited outside. Instead of avoiding them as she'd instructed her mother to do, Maya walked directly toward them. Miss Santos, is it true your father stole designs from Carlos Vega? One called out. Miss Santos, can you comment on James Westbrook's statement about your father's accident? Maya stopped before them, her waitress training giving her an unexpected poise under pressure. The story that had begun with a whispered name in a billionaire's ear was about to become a public battle for truth, and she was ready to fight. My name is Maya Santos, she began, her voice steady, and I'm here to tell you about a brilliant engineer named Javier Santos, who was murdered for his ideas. The impromptu press conference on the steps of Maya's apartment building wasn't what the reporters had expected. They had come hunting for scandal, for confirmation of Richard Harrington's insinuations about a radical immigrant engineer stealing ideas. Instead, they found themselves captivated by a young woman whose quiet dignity and precise recounting of events left no room for sensationalism. My father, Javier Santos, collaborated with his mentor Carlos Vega in Mexico, Maya explained, her voice steady. He never hid this. His innovations at Harrington Global built upon that foundation exactly as all scientific and engineering progress does. What made his work revolutionary was how he adapted and advanced those concepts. She held up the folder Alexander had given her. I have documentation proving that Richard Harrington was fully aware of my father's background when he hired him. This wasn't a revelation. It became a convenient weapon only after my father refused to let his work be stolen. A reporter from the Times raised her hand. Miss Santos, James Westbrook just characterized your father's death as a workplace accident. You're calling it murder. That's a serious accusation. It is, Maya agreed, and I have evidence to support it. She nodded to Carmen, who distributed copies of key documents to the journalists. These internal memos show that 2 security personnel were specifically instructed to handle the Santos situation the night my father died, the same night he threatened to go public about his stolen patents. The reporters leafed through the documents, their expressions shifting from skepticism to focused interest. One of those security officers has since died, Maya continued. The other was James Westbrook, the same man who just claimed he wasn't present that night. His signature is on the report filed afterward. A murmur spread through the small crowd. Carmen stepped forward. We're prepared to file criminal charges based on this evidence. The statute of limitations for murder has not expired. More questions followed, which Maya handled with composure that belied her racing heart. When asked about Alexander's role, she chose her words carefully. Alexander Harrington has recently provided crucial evidence that his father and uncle concealed for 15 years. His cooperation has been ... single quote, she paused. Complicated but necessary. As the impromptu press conference ended, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. You've started a war my father won't easily surrender. Meet me at the Santos Foundation office tomorrow, 10 a.m. Maya showed Carmen the message. What foundation office? Apparently he's been busy, Carmen replied. This might actually work in our favor. If he's already established the foundation, it creates a public commitment they can't easily reverse the next morning. Maya found herself in an airy office space in downtown Brooklyn. The glass doors already bore a temporary sign, the Javier Santos' Foundation for Sustainable Architecture. Inside, Alexander was directing a small team setting up computers and arranging furniture. You didn't waste time, Maya observed as he approached. I told you I was serious about making this right, he replied, the shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. The foundation is officially incorporated as of yesterday. The endowment transfer completes today. I wanted it legally established before my father could interfere. He led her to a private office where blueprints were spread across a conference table. These are the original designs, your father's work. I had them retrieved from secure storage where my father had hidden them. Maya ran her fingers over the detailed drawing, recognizing her father's distinctive handwriting in the margin. Emotion threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it back. Your press statement was effective, Alexander said. My father is furious. Good. You don't understand. When Richard Harrington is cornered, he becomes dangerous. Alexander's expression was grim. He's calling an emergency board meeting. He intends to rescind my authority to establish the foundation. Can he do that? Technically, no. I'm CEO now, but the board is still loyal to him, and my position isn't secure until his official retirement next week. Alexander studied her face. Do you trust me, Maya? She met his gaze directly. I trust your guilt. It's the most reliable part of you. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair enough. Then believe me when I say we need to move faster than planned. I've scheduled a press conference of my own for this afternoon. I'm going to publicly acknowledge your father's contributions and announce the foundation, whether my father approves or not. And Westbrook? That's more complicated. The evidence against him is strong but not absolute. Without his confession, so get it, Maya interrupted. You're his nephew. He trusts you. We're a wire. Alexander looked taken aback. You want me to entrap my own uncle? I want justice for my father, Maya replied evenly, by whatever means necessary. Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang. The blood drained from his face as he listened. When? He asked tersely. Is he all right? Another pause. I'll be right there. He ended the call looking shaken. That was security. My father collapsed at the board meeting. They've taken him to Presbyterian. Despite everything Richard had done, Maya felt a flicker of sympathy for the genuine distress on Alexander's face. Go. We'll continue this later. Alexander hesitated. The press conference will wait, Maya finished. He's your father. As Alexander hurried out, Carmen arrived, taking in the foundation office with raised eyebrows. Impressive commitment to the cause, she remarked. Where's the Billionaire hospital? His father collapsed. Maya filled her in on the morning's developments. Carmen looked skeptical. Convenient timing. Richard Harrington has a history of health episodes when things aren't going his way. You think it's fake? I think nothing happens by accident with that family. Carmen examined the blueprints. These are significant, though. Solid evidence of your father's work. Maya's phone buzzed with an alert. It's Lucia. Doctor, Patel has news about her treatment response. At the hospital, Maya found her mother and sister in cautious, good spirits. Dr. Patel was explaining the latest test result. The new protocol is showing remarkable effectiveness, she said. Inflammation markers are down 50% and kidney function is improving. If this continues, we can start discussing outpatient options in a few weeks. Lucia squeezed Maya's hand. Whatever deal you made, it's working. Maya smiled, the weight of her sister's illness lightening for the first time in years. It's just the beginning as they discussed next steps. Maya noticed unusual activity in the corridor, extra security personnel, hushed conversations among staff. What's happening? She asked a passing nurse. VIP patient, the nurse replied discreetly. Richard Harrington was admitted. The entire floor is on alert protocols. Maya felt a chill. Richard was in the same hospital, perhaps just corridors away from her vulnerable family. The man responsible for her father's death and now attempting to smear his legacy was under the same roof. We should go, told her mother and sister. I'll explain at home. As they gathered Lucia's things, Maya stepped into the hallway to call Carmen, found herself face to face with Alexander. His appearance startled her. Gone was the composed executive. In his place stood a man visibly struggling with grief and something that looked like fear. Maya, he said, his voice rough, I need to speak with you. Privately. She glanced back at her family, then nodded toward a small waiting area. 5 minutes. Once alone, Alexander spoke urgently. My father is dying, not in the abstract terminal illness way we've discussed. He's actively dying. Hours, maybe days. The news was unexpected. I'm sorry, Maya offered, meaning it despite everything. Before he lost consciousness, he told me something. Alexander's gaze was intense. He said, tell Santos' daughter to check her father's original notebooks. Page 43. The truth works both ways. Maya felt cold. What does that mean? I don't know, but he insisted it was important. Alexander ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Maya, I think he's trying to make some kind of peace in his own twisted way. Or setting a final trap, she countered. Possibly both. Alexander checked his watch. The board is in chaos. Some members are already aligning with me, others are resistant. This transition is happening now, ready or not. He looked at her directly. I'm still doing the press conference today, with or without the board's blessing. I need you there. The request caught her off guard. Why? Because this was never just about corporate accountability or financial compensation. It's about honoring your father. That should come from both of us. As Maya considered his words, her mother appeared in the doorway, her expression wary as she recognized Alexander. Maya? Alina questioned softly. Mom, this is Alexander Harrington, Maya said, watching her mother's face carefully. He's been helping me uncover the truth about Dad's death. Elena's gaze sharpened. Harrington, she repeated, the name clearly significant to her. I remember you. You came to our apartment once with Javier, before he died. She turned to Maya. You never mentioned you were working with Richard Harrington's son. The revelation stunned Maya. You met Alexander? You never told me. It was only once, Elena said. Your father brought him home for dinner. A young man he was mentoring at work. Her eyes never left Alexander's face. You were there the night the police came to tell us about the accident. Alexander nodded, visibly shaken by Elena's recognition. Yes, I drove them to your door. I couldn't bring myself to come in. I was a coward. The dynamics shifted as Maya processed this new information. Alexander wasn't just her father's colleague. He had been in their home, broken bread with her family. The betrayal cut deeper than she had realized. The notebooks, Elena said suddenly. Is that what this is about? Javier's research journals? Maya and Alexander exchanged surprised glances. Dad's notebooks? Maya asked. You still have them? Elena nodded slowly. In the storage locker. He was paranoid about them at the end. Made me promise to keep them safe. Her eyes narrowed at Alexander. He said if anything happened to him, they were his insurance. The pieces began falling into place. What Richard Harrington had referred to, what he wanted them to find, was in her father's own words, preserved all these years without anyone realizing their significance. We need to see them, Maya said, especially page 43. As they prepared to leave, Alexander's phone rang again. His face transformed as he listened. Grief, shock, and something like relief washing over his features in waves. I understand, he said quietly. Thank you for calling. He lowered the phone slowly. My father just died. The simple statement hung in the air, marking the end of one era and the uncertain beginning of another. Whatever Richard Harrington had wanted them to find in Javier's notebooks, it had been his final move in a game that had spanned decades. The question was, had it been a move toward redemption, or one last attempt to protect his legacy at any cost? Richard Harrington's death transformed the corporate battlefield overnight. By morning, the news dominated headlines. Business channels ran retrospectives on his career, and Harrington Tower's lobby filled with flowers and tributes. For a man whose ruthlessness had shaped an empire, the public mourning was as much about power as it was about grief. Maya watched the coverage from her family's cramped living room, where Elena had hauled out a dusty storage box containing Javier's notebooks. 15 leather-bound journals were stacked on their coffee table, each filled with her father's precise handwriting, half in Spanish, half in English. He wrote in them every day, Elena said softly. It was like a ritual. Even when he was exhausted, he would sit at the kitchen table and document his ideas. Carmen examined the notebooks with a lawyer's careful scrutiny. These could be crucial evidence. The contemporaneous thoughts of your father, recorded during his time at Harrington Global. Maya found the notebook covering the final months of her father's life. The entry started with optimism about his collaboration with Alexander. A.H. understands the vision. Unlike his father, he sees beyond profit to possibility, and gradually darkened as Richard's interference increased. She turned to page 43 with trepidation, unsure what Richard had wanted them to find. The page contained a detailed account of a conversation between Javier and Carlos Vega, dated 3 months before Javier's death. Carlos called today, his health worsening, Javier had written. He confessed something that changes everything. The turbine modification wasn't our original design after all. 20 years ago, Carlos was approached by a young American engineer who shared revolutionary concepts but lacked resources to develop them. They collaborated briefly before the American disappeared. Carlos incorporated elements of those designs into our work, believing the American had abandoned the project. Maya's breath caught as she read the next lines. The American's name was Daniel Harrington, Richard's younger brother. Carlos only realized the connection when I mentioned the Harrington Company. Apparently, Daniel had a falling out with his brother decades ago. The sustainable designs Richard is fighting so hard to suppress originated within his own family. God, Carmen breathed, reading over Maya's shoulder. Richard's brother was the original source of the designs. Maya continued reading, her hands trembling slightly. I confronted Richard with this information today, thinking it might soften his stance. Instead, he became enraged, accusing me of fabricating the connection to extort the company. When I mentioned Carlos had documentation of his collaboration with Daniel, Richard threatened to bury us both if I pursued this. The man has spent decades building his empire on his brother's discarded vision while systematically erasing Daniel from the company history. The final paragraph was the most chilling. Aho knows nothing of his uncle Daniel. Richard has kept this family's secret from everyone. I've made copies of Carlos's letters and supporting documents, hidden where Richard can't find them. If anything happens to me, this is the truth that must survive. Maya looked up, processing the implications. Richard stole the concepts from his own brother before he stole them from my father. It was a pattern, not an isolated incident. That's what he meant by the truth works both ways, Carmen said. He was acknowledging his original sin while trying to mitigate his guilt for what happened to your father. Elena had been listening silently, but now she spoke up. Javier mentioned these hidden copies. He said if anything happened to him, I should look behind the loose tile in our old apartment bathroom. Maya stared at her mother. Mom, we moved out of that apartment 14 years ago. I know, Elena said quietly, but before we left I checked. The documents were there. I've kept them all this time. She went to her bedroom and returned with a sealed manila envelope that had yellowed with age. Inside were photocopies of handwritten letters between Carlos Vega and Daniel Harrington, along with preliminary sketches of designs that were unmistakably precursors to Javier's later work. Why didn't you ever mention this? Maya asked, stunned by her mother's secret. Elena's eyes welled with tears. Because your father made me promise to keep it hidden, unless there was no other choice. He said Richard Harrington was dangerous, that these documents could destroy him, but might also bring destruction on anyone who used them. She took Maya's hand. After Javier died, I was alone with 2 young children. I was terrified. The revelation of Elena's 15-year secret hung heavily in the room. Maya understood her mother's fear, but couldn't help feeling that justice for her father had been delayed by this caution. Her phone buzzed with a message from Alexander. Press conference postponed for obvious reasons. Funeral in 2 days. Need to meet before then. The notebooks? Maya showed Carmen the message. What do we do with this information? Carmen considered the question with her usual strategic mind. We now have evidence linking 3 generations of innovation, Daniel Harrington's original concepts, Carlos Vega's development of them, and your father's modern implementation. It strengthens our case significantly. She held up the aged documents. This proves that Richard's attacks on your father's credibility were not only false, but hypocritical. He was projecting his own theft onto Javier. Should we go public immediately? Not yet, Carmen advised. Richard's death changes the dynamics. Alexander is now firmly in control of Harrington Global. We should see what he offers before showing our full hand. Maya agreed to meet with Alexander that afternoon at the foundation office. When she arrived, the space had transformed overnight. The temporary sign had been replaced with permanent lettering. Inside, a wall displayed enlarged copies of her father's original designs with plaques crediting Javier Santos as the principal innovator. Alexander emerged from his office looking exhausted but resolute. The weight of succession rested visibly on his shoulder. You found the notebooks, he said, noticing the journal in Maya's hand. Yes, and page 43 was illuminating. She opened it to the relevant passage and watched his expression as he read. Alexander's face registered shock, then a complex mixture of emotions as he absorbed the implications about his family. Daniel Harrington, he said quietly. My father never spoke of a brother, not once. My mother has documentary evidence, Maya told him. Letters between Daniel and Carlos Vega from the 1940s. The preliminary designs that evolved into my father's work decades later. Alexander sank into a chair, visibly processing this revelation. My entire family history is built on lies. Not just your family history, Maya corrected him. Your company's foundation. The Harrington Empire began with stolen innovation. First from your uncle, then from my father. I never knew, Alexander insisted, looking directly at her. You have to believe that. I do, Maya said, surprising herself with the realization that she trusted him on this point. Your father kept you in the dark, just like he did with everyone. Alexander was silent for a long moment. The funeral is day after tomorrow. The board expects me to deliver a eulogy celebrating my father's business genius and vision. His laugh was hollow. What am I supposed to say now? That he built an empire by stealing ideas and silencing those who created them? Maya felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Alexander had lost not only his father, but also the narrative that had shaped his understanding of himself and his legacy. What will you do with this information? He asked, gesturing to the notebook. It was the question Maya had been wrestling with since discovering the truth. The revelation about Daniel Harrington complicated everything. This wasn't just about justice for her father anymore. It was about a multi-generational pattern of exploitation that had claimed multiple victims. That depends on you, she finally said. Alexander looked up, questioning. The foundation is a start, Maya continued. The medical trust for Lucia is secure, but true justice isn't just about money or buildings with my father's name on them. It's about the whole truth becoming public. You want me to expose my father's crimes at his funeral, Alexander stated, understanding her implication. I want you to choose integrity over mythology, Maya corrected. The same choice my father made 15 years ago, the choice that cost him his life. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out over the Brooklyn skyline. If I do this, if I publicly acknowledge not only your father's contributions, but also my father's theft and my uncle's erased legacy, the company's stock will plummet. The board might try to remove me. Everything my father built could collapse. Or Maya countered. You could rebuild it on a foundation of truth rather than deception. Create something authentic from the ashes of your father's lies. Their conversation was interrupted by Maya's phone ringing. Dr. Patel, Miss Santos, the doctor said when Maya answered. I wanted to let you know your sister's latest results are remarkable. The treatment is working better than we anticipated. She could potentially begin outpatient care within 2 weeks. The news was a bright point amid the moral complexities of the day. When Maya shared it with Alexander, his expression softened. At least something good has come from all this, he said. Whatever happens next, Lucia will be okay. As Maya prepared to leave, Alexander stopped her. I've made a decision about the funeral. His voice was firm, a new resolve evident. I'd like you and your mother to attend. The request was so unexpected that Maya could only stare at him. It seems fitting, he continued, that as we close one chapter of this story, all the affected parties should be present, if you're comfortable with it. Maya wasn't sure she was comfortable with it, but she understood the symbolic importance. I'll ask my mother. Carmen should come too. Alexander nodded. Of course, he hesitated, then added, Maya, regardless of what happens with the company or my position, I want you to know that the foundation is legally independent. It can't be dismantled even if I'm ousted. Your father's legacy is secure. As Maya left the foundation office, she felt the narrative shifting once again. What had begun with a whispered name in a billionaire's ear had evolved into something far more complex than simple vengeance or justice. It had become about truth, messy, complicated, multi-generational truth that would affect far more lives than she had initially imagined. 2 days later, she would stand witness as Alexander Harrington made his choice between perpetuating his father's legacy of deception or embracing a painful but necessary truth. Richard Harrington's funeral transformed St. Thomas's Church into a testament to power and influence. Captains of industry, political figures, and social elites filled the pews beneath soaring Gothic arches. The financial press clustered respectfully at the perimeter, documenting which power players attended and which didn't. Every absence as significant as each presence in the invisible ledger of corporate politics. Maya, Elena, and Carmen arrived discreetly, escorted by foundation staff to seats near the front, a placement that raised eyebrows among those who recognized them. Lucia had remained at the hospital, her treatment continuing despite the day's events. Are you sure about this? Carmen whispered as they settled into their pew, acutely aware of the curious glances and hushed speculations around them. Being here could be interpreted as forgiveness or capitulation, or as bearing witness. Maya countered, her gaze fixed on the ornate casket at the altar, draped with white roses. We're not hiding anymore. Elena sat rigidly beside them, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since agreeing to attend, but Maya sensed the turmoil beneath her composed exterior. For her mother, this church contained not just her husband's murderer, but 15 years of suppressed grief and fear. At precisely 11, organ music filled the cathedral as the Harrington family processed down the aisle. Alexander led the group, followed by an elegant older woman Maya assumed was his mother, and several cousins including James Westbrook, whose face betrayed no recognition as he passed their pew. The service proceeded with the polished dignity that wealth commands professional singers. Perfectly timed eulogies from business associates praising Richard's vision and leadership. No one mentioned his ruthlessness or the bodies buried beneath his success. History was already being sanitized in real time. When Alexander finally approached the pulpit, a hush fell over the congregation. As Richard's only son and successor, his eulogy would set the tone for the company's future. He stood silently for a moment, surveying the assembled mourners, his gaze eventually finding Maya's. My father, he began, His voice steady, was a complicated man. The simple statement hung in the air, its understated ambiguity capturing attention. He built Harrington Global from a regional construction company into an international conglomerate through relentless determination and strategic vision. That is the legacy celebrated in business textbooks and annual reports. Alexander paused, taking a measured breath. But legacies are rarely as simple as the stories we tell about them. Behind every great fortune, every empire, lie choices, moral calculations made in moments that define not just careers but character. Murmurs rippled through the church. This was not the sanitized tribute everyone had expected. My father taught me that reputation was everything in business. Protect the Harrington name at all costs, he would say. I always believed he meant protect it through excellence and integrity. Alexander's voice took on a new gravity. I've recently discovered that's not what he meant at all. The murmurs grew louder. Maya felt Carmen tense beside her while Elena reached for her hand. In recent weeks, I've uncovered evidence that the architectural innovations that transformed Harrington Global in the 1960s, the sustainable building, technologies that became our hallmark, were not developed by our in-house team as company history claimed. Board members shifted uncomfortably in the front pews. James Westbrook's face hardened into a mask of barely contained fury. These revolutionary designs were the work of a brilliant engineer named Javier Santos, who was employed by Harrington Global as a consultant. When he refused to silently surrender his patents, he was threatened. And on October 17, 1968, when threats proved insufficient, Javier Santos was killed at a Harrington construction site. Gasps echoed through the cathedral. Photographers' cameras clicked rapidly. Elena's grip on Maya's hand tightened painfully. I know this because I was there that night, Alexander continued, his voice wavering for the first time. Not at the moment of his death. I arrived too late to prevent it, but I witnessed the aftermath. I saw what my father's loyal security team had done, and I remained silent out of fear and shame. For 15 years, the church had gone completely still, hundreds of people frozen in collective shock. But there's more to this story than one man's death. The innovations Javier Santos developed were themselves built upon concepts, originally created by someone whose name has been systematically erased from our family history, my uncle, Daniel Harrington. At this revelation, Richard's widow visibly flinched, her composed facade cracking for the first time. My father didn't just steal from Javier Santos. Before that, he stole from his own brother, a brother whose name I never even knew existed until this week. A brother who disappeared from family photographs, company records, and all public mention after his ideas were appropriated. Alexander looked directly at his mother, whose face had gone ashen. Two brilliant men separated by decades, both erased to protect a mythology of singular genius and self-made success. He turned back to the congregation, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. As I stand here today to honor my father's memory, I believe the greatest tribute I can offer is truth. Richard Harrington built something remarkable, but he built it on stolen dreams and silenced voices. That too is his legacy, and it's one I refuse to perpetuate. Alexander stepped away from the pulpit, returning to his seat amid a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. No one moved, no one spoke. The calculated risk he had taken to tell the truth at his father's funeral, before the assembled powers of corporate America, was either an act of extraordinary courage or career suicide. The minister eventually recovered enough composure to continue the service, but the damage was done. The myth of Richard Harrington had been shattered by his own son, in the most public forum possible. As the final hymn concluded and the pallbearers moved to escort the casket, James Westbrook broke protocol. He stepped into the center aisle, blocking Alexander's path. "You've destroyed everything he built," he hissed, loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Your own father, not even cold in his grave." Alexander met his uncle's gaze without flinching. "No, I'm saving what can still be saved. The rest deserve to fall." The confrontation might have escalated if not for the unexpected intervention of Richard's widow. She placed a restraining hand on Westbrook's arm, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough, James. It's done." The simple statement carried unmistakable authority. Whatever her private feelings about Alexander's revelations, she would not allow a public spectacle to further tarnish the day. Westbrook stepped back, though hatred still burned in his eyes. As the family processed out behind the casket, Alexander paused briefly beside Maya's pew. No words were exchanged, none were necessary. In that moment, they were united by a shared understanding of what truth cost and what it was worth. Outside the church, the media had transformed from respectful observers to frenzied hunters. News of Alexander's eulogy had already leaked to those waiting on the steps. Camera crews jostled for position. Reporters shouted questions. Carmen efficiently shepherded Maya and Elena through a side exit to a waiting car. But not before they heard the first breaking news alert on a reporter's phone. Harrington Global shares plummet amid CEO's funeral confession. "It's going to be chaos," Carmen said as they pulled away from the church. "The press will be desperate to talk to you both." Elena stared out the window, silent tears streaming down her face. "After all these years," she finally whispered, Javier's name spoken aloud in that place, his truth acknowledged. Maya felt her own eyes welling. The public vindication of her father was more overwhelming than she had anticipated. For 15 years, the Santos's family had lived with the private knowledge of injustice. business. Now that burden had been lifted not just from their shoulders, but from history itself. Back at their apartment, Carmen's phone rang constantly with media requests and updates on the fallout. Harrington Global stock had dropped 20% within hours. The board was meeting an emergency session. Rumors swirled about potential criminal investigations into James Westbrook. By evening, another development emerged. Alexander had released complete documentation on both Javier Santos's contributions and the previously unknown history of Daniel Harrington. The company website now featured a revised history section titled "The True Innovators Behind Harrington Global," with extensive biographical information about both men. "He's going all in," Carmen said, scanning the site. "No half measures." Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Turn on CNBC." They found the channel showing a live press conference from Harrington Tower. Alexander stood at a podium looking tired but resolute. "This morning I shared difficult truths about Harrington Global's history," he was saying. "I did so knowing the potential consequences for our company's stock price and my own position. Those consequences have been swift and significant." He paused, squaring his shoulders. "The board of directors met this afternoon and voted to remove me as CEO, effective immediately." Maya gasped. Despite anticipating backlash, the speed and decisiveness of Alexander's ousting was shocking. "I accept their decision without reservation," he continued. "However, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. The Javier Santos Foundation for Sustainable Architecture remains independently funded and operational. The truth about our company's history will remain public, and I will cooperate fully with any investigations into the circumstances surrounding Javier Santos's death." As the press conference continued, Maya's phone rang. Lucia calling from the hospital. "I saw the news," her sister said immediately. "Is it true? They fired him for telling the truth about Dad?" "It's true," Maya confirmed. "He sacrificed everything. What happens now?" Lucia asked. It was the question everyone was asking, from the highest levels of corporate America to the Santos' family's living room. Alexander Harrington had detonated a truth bomb that was still sending shockwaves through multiple worlds. Maya looked at her mother, who had spent 15 years protecting evidence that might have brought justice sooner, but at unimaginable risk. She thought of Alexander, who had finally chosen integrity over empire, and she thought of her father, whose brilliance and principles had outlasted the power that tried to erase him. "Now," Maya said, "we build something new from the truth." In the days following Richard Harrington's funeral, an unexpected calm settled over the Santos' family apartment. While the outside world churned with corporate drama and media frenzy, Maya found herself experiencing a strange sense of peace. The truth so long buried was finally in the open air, breathing and alive. Lucia had been discharged for outpatient treatment, her health improving steadily under the comprehensive care program. She sat on their small balcony most morning, regaining strength in the autumn sunshine, sketching dance choreography she hoped to perform again someday. Elena moved through their home with a lightness Maya hadn't seen in 15 years. The shadow that had hung over her since Javier's death hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from the heavy weight of suppressed truth to the more bearable burden of acknowledged grief. The doorbell interrupted their breakfast on the 4th day after the funeral. Maya opened it to find a courier with a large package from the Javier Santos Foundation. Inside was a framed document, Javier's original patent application with his name fully restored as the primary inventor. A note accompanied it in Alexander's handwriting, the first of many reclamations. "This was filed with the patent office yesterday. History is being corrected." Maya traced her father's signature with her fingertips. This wasn't just symbolic recognition. It was legal restoration of what had been stolen. "He's still fighting for us even after losing everything," she said, showing her mother and sister the document. "Has he really lost everything?" Lucia asked, surprisingly perceptive. "Or has he found something worth more?" Before Maya could respond, Carmen called with updates that had been developing behind the scenes. "The Manhattan DA's office has opened a formal investigation into your father's death," she reported. "They've requested the evidence we compiled along with Alexander's testimony. James Westbrook has been placed on administrative leave from all his corporate positions." "Will they actually prosecute after 15 years?" Maya asked. "Murder has no statute of limitations," Carmen reminded her. "Psst. And with Alexander's testimony plus the documentation, they have a solid case. It won't bring your father back, but there will be legal accountability." Later that day, Maya visited the foundation office for a scheduled meeting with the newly assembled board. Alexander had appointed a diverse group of architects, engineers, and community leaders, with Maya serving as the Santos' family representative. Despite his removal as CEO of Harrington Global, he remained the foundation's chairman, his personal wealth having funded its endowment before the board could strip him of company assets. The foundation space buzzed with purpose and energy. Preliminary scholarship criteria were being developed. A sustainable building competition for immigrant students was in planning stages, and an archival project had begun to document both Javier Santos's and Daniel Harrington's contributions to architectural innovation. Maya found Alexander in the conference room, reviewing applications from universities seeking to partner with the foundation. The past week had visibly transformed him, his expensive suit replaced by casual attire, his corporate polish giving way to a more authentic presence. He seemed both diminished and expanded by his choice. "The board appointed an interim CEO," he said when she entered. "Franklin Moore, one of the few directors who actually voted against my removal." Is that good news? Complicated. Franklin is principled but pragmatic. He'll try to salvage the company's reputation without fully embracing the truth. The stock price. Alexander smiled, down 32% and still falling. The shareholders are in full panic mode. Do you regret it? Maya asked directly. Telling the truth? He considered the question seriously. I regret not doing it 15 years ago. I regret every day I participated in my father's deception. He looked at her steadily. But this moment? No. This is the first time in my adult life I've been able to look in the mirror without flinching. Their conversation was interrupted by Alexander's assistant announcing an unexpected visitor. Richard Harrington's widow, Elaine. She entered the room with the composed dignity that had been her hallmark at the funeral. Though in her 70s, she carried herself with the straight-backed posture of someone who had spent decades in the public eye, every movement calculated and precise. Alexander. She greeted her son with formal coolness. Then, turning to Maya, Miss Santos, I hoped I might find you here as well. Alexander offered his mother a chair, which she took with a nod of acknowledgement. I'll come directly to the point, Elaine said. I'm aware of the steps you've taken, Alexander, to correct the historical record regarding Javier Santos and your Uncle Daniel. I'm also aware that the foundation you've established is now beyond the board's reach. That's correct, Alexander confirmed. What you may not know is that I have resources of my own inherited from my family, separate from Harrington Global. She opened her handbag and removed a slim leather portfolio. I've come to make a contribution to the foundation, a significant one. Alexander looked stunned. Mother, I don't understand. You haven't spoken more than 10 words to me since the funeral. Elaine's perfectly composed facade showed the first hint of emotion, a subtle softening around her eyes. Because I needed time to process what you revealed about your father, about Daniel. She turned to Maya. About your father. She handed the portfolio to Maya, who opened it to find transfer documents for a trust valued at $25 million. Designated for the Javier Santos Foundation. Why? Maya asked, genuinely puzzled by this unexpected development. Elaine smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her immaculate skirt. Because I knew, Ms. Santos, not everything, but enough. I knew Richard had done something unforgivable regarding your father. I knew about Daniel, the brother who was never spoken of, but whose photograph Richard kept locked in his desk drawer. Turned to Alexander. I made the bargain so many women of my generation made silence in exchange for security. I told myself it was to protect you. But in truth, it was also to protect my position, my lifestyle. A single tear escaped her perfect composure. When you spoke the truth at the funeral, I realized you were braver than I ever was. The revelation that Elaine had known had spent decades as a silent witness to Richard's crimes shifted something fundamental in the room's dynamics. She had been neither innocent nor ignorant, but another kind of victim of Richard's ruthless pursuit of power. The contribution comes with one condition, Elaine continued, regaining her composure. I want to help locate Daniel Harrington if he's still alive, or his descendants if he's not. They deserve to be part of this reconciliation. You think Daniel might still be alive? Alexander asked, his voice catching. Your father believed he was, at least as of 10 years ago. Elaine's revelation landed with seismic impact. He hired private investigators periodically to track Daniel, though he claimed it was to ensure Daniel remained silent about the past. Maya thought of the complex web of deception and stolen innovation that connected their families across generations. Finding Daniel Harrington or his descendants would complete the circle of truth, bringing together all those affected by Richard's actions. We'll help you find him, she said with quiet certainty. Their meeting was interrupted by Maya's phone, Dr. Patel calling from the hospital. Ms. Santos, your sister's latest test results are remarkable, the doctor said without preamble. The treatment protocol is showing unprecedented effectiveness. If this continues, we're looking at a potential full remission. The news sent a wave of joy through Maya, so intense it momentarily displaced all other concerns. Are you certain? As certain as medicine allows us to be, Doctor. Patel replied. Lucia's case is being documented as part of a research study now. Her response rate is among the highest we've seen. After ending the call, Maya shared the news with Alexander and Elaine, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Lucia might recover completely. The treatment, the one you're funding, made possible. It's working better than anyone hoped. Alexander smiled, genuine happiness breaking through his fatigue. That's the best news I've heard in weeks. This is why the foundation matters, Maya said, suddenly passionate. Not just to correct historical wrongs, but to create something positive from all of this. Lucia isn't the only one who will benefit from these medical advances. My father's work will help build sustainable communities. Your uncle's innovations will be recognized. She looked between mother and son, the fractured remnants of the Harrington dynasty, and recognized that they too were being offered a chance at redemption, at rebuilding something authentic from the wreckage of Richard's ambition. As Maya left the foundation office that evening, the city was bathed in the golden light of sunset. She thought about the tangled path that had led her here, from a whispered name in a billionaire's ear to a multi-generational quest for justice and truth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. News about Daniel. Call me when you can. The search for the lost Harrington brother had already yielded results. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, creating a picture far more complex and ultimately more hopeful than Maya could have imagined when she first recognized Alexander in the restaurant. That night, she sat with her mother and sister on their small balcony, watching the lights of the city flicker to life against the darkening sky. They spoke of Javier not with the heavy grief that had characterized their memories for 15 years, but with a lightness that came from knowing his name was being restored, his legacy secured. He would be proud of you, Elena said, taking Maya's hand, not just for finding justice, but for how you've pursued it. Maya thought of Alexander's choice to sacrifice position and power for truth, of Elaine's belated but significant step toward atonement, of her own journey from vengeful anger to something more nuanced and healed. I think, she said quietly, he would be proud of all of us. Across the city, in a penthouse that no longer felt like home, Alexander Harrington studied a faded photograph of two young men, his father and the uncle he had never known. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal, professional, personal, but for the first time in his life, he was facing those challenges without the burden of inherited lies. The story that had begun with a whispered accusation was transforming into something neither Maya nor Alexander could have predicted, a collaboration to heal the wounds inflicted by the previous generation, not through forgetting but through acknowledging, not through silence but through truth. 3 months after Richard Harrington's funeral, winter had settled over New York. The city sparkled with holiday lights, a facade of warmth against the December chill. Inside the newly renovated Javier Santos Foundation headquarters, now occupying an entire floor of a Brooklyn building, preparations were underway for an event that would bring closure to a story decades in the making. Maya stood by the window, watching snowflakes drift past the glass. The space had transformed, much like her life had since that fateful night at La Maison. Displays showcasing her father's designs lined the walls, alongside newly discovered sketches from Daniel Harrington's portfolio. The connection between these two innovative minds, one silenced by death, one by erasure, was now documented and celebrated rather than buried. The guests are starting to arrive, Alexander said, joining her at the window. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted, not quite friendship, not quite partnership, but a bond forged through shared purpose and understanding. Is he nervous? Maya asked. Wouldn't you be, after 60 years of exile? The he in question was Daniel Harrington, found alive at age 94 in a modest retirement community outside Portland, Oregon. Alexander's text message that autumn evening had been the breakthrough they'd been hoping for. Private investigators hired by Elaine had located Daniel living under the name Daniel Owen, the middle name that had become his only connection to his former identity. The old man had initially refused contact, suspicious of any overture from the family that had cast him out. Only a detailed letter from Maya explaining her father's connection to his work had finally convinced him to engage. It still feels surreal, Maya said, adjusting a display of Carlos Vega's letters. 3 generations connected by innovation and betrayal finally coming together. Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. My father spent his life building walls between people. It seems fitting that his death is dismantling them. The elevator doors opened and Carmen entered with an elderly man in a wheelchair. Despite his advanced age, Daniel Harrington's eyes were alert and penetrating, the same startling blue as his nephew Richard's had been. Beside him walked a middle-aged man who was unmistakably his son, the family resemblance striking across generations. Maya and Alexander crossed the room together. This meeting, the lost Harrington brother returned to reclaim his place in history, was the culmination of their shared journey. Uncle Daniel, Alexander said, his voice catching slightly. Welcome to the Javier Santos Foundation. The old man studied Alexander's face with intensity. You have your grandmother's chin, he finally said, his voice surprisingly strong. Beatrice always did have the strongest family. He turned to Maya, reaching for her hand with his weathered one. And you must be Javier's daughter. He was a good man, one of the few who saw value in an old engineer's discarded dreams. Tears pricked at Maya's eyes as she clasped his hand. He would be honored to know you're here today. As more guests arrived for the evening's event, Maya observed the improbable gathering taking shape. Lucia, now in remission and rebuilding her strength, chatted animatedly with the dean of the architectural school that would administer the foundation's first scholarships. Elena moved through the room with quiet grace, pausing occasionally before displays of Javier's work, a gentle smile softening her features. Elaine Harrington arrived with characteristic poise, though her composure faltered momentarily when she approached her long-lost brother-in-law. Their conversation, conducted in low, intense exchanges at the periphery of the room, spoke of decades of unspoken history finally being acknowledged. The most surprising arrival was Franklin Moore, interim CEO of Harrington Global, accompanied by several board members. Their presence suggested a shift in corporate strategy, a tentative olive branch extended from the company that had first severed these connections. As the gathering settled into the presentation space, Alexander stepped to the podium, the weight of the moment evident in his bearing. Thank you all for coming tonight to what is both an ending and a beginning, he began. 3 months ago, we gathered for a very different ceremony, one where painful truths were finally spoken aloud after decades of silence. Tonight, we celebrate the legacy that truth has made possible. He gestured to the displays around the room. The Javier Santos Foundation now holds the complete archived works of 3 extraordinary innovators: Javier Santos, Carlos Vega, and Daniel Harrington. Their collaborative vision spanning countries, decades, and generations has been restored to its rightful place in architectural history. Alexander turned to Daniel's wheelchair. Tonight we announce the Daniel Harrington Fellowship for Innovative Design, a program that will identify and support immigrant engineers and architects whose voices might otherwise go unheard in the corporate landscape. Daniel nodded slightly, emotion evident in his lined face. We also celebrate a milestone in our justice initiative, Alexander continued. Yesterday, James Westbrook signed a comprehensive plea agreement with the Manhattan District Attorney. He has admitted his role in Javier Santos's death and will face appropriate legal consequences, while also providing full testimony about the corporate cover-up that followed. Maya felt a complex wave of emotions at this announcement, not triumph or vindication, but a somber satisfaction that truth had finally prevailed. And finally, Alexander said, "I'm pleased to announce that effective next month, Harrington Global will be renamed Santos Harrington International." Recognizing the dual legacy of innovation that built our company, murmurs of surprise rippled through the audience. Franklin Moore nodded confirmation from his seat. The board had approved this dramatic rebranding, acknowledging that their corporate future depended on embracing rather than burying the past. After the presentations concluded and guests mingled over refreshments, Maya found herself in a quiet corner with Alexander. "Santos Harrington International," she said, testing the name. "That wasn't part of our agreement." "It wasn't my decision," Alexander replied. "The board voted unanimously. Apparently, transparency is the new corporate strategy." His smile held a hint of irony. "They've offered me a position heading a new ethics division, by the way. Will you take it?" "I haven't decided. The foundation is my priority now." He looked around at what they'd built together. Though there's a certain poetic justice in rebuilding from within, a comfortable silence fell between them. Two people who had begun as adversaries, now connected by something deeper than either could define. "I never thanked you," Alexander said finally. "For what?" "For whispering my name in that restaurant. For starting all of this." His expression was earnest, vulnerable in a way the corporate scion had never allowed himself to be. "You could have taken the money and walked away. Instead, you demanded the whole truth, no matter the cost." Maya thought back to that moment, the fear and determination that had propelled her to lean down and whisper her father's name into a billionaire's ear. She could never have imagined where that simple act would lead. "I did it for my father," she said. But somewhere along the way, it became about more than just him. It became about all of us, about what happens when truth is valued more than power or money. The event concluded with an unexpected gesture. Daniel Harrington, supported by his son, rose from his wheelchair to stand beside his designs. Maya joined them, carrying one of her father's original notebooks. Alexander completed the circle, holding Carlos Vega's letters. 4 lives connected across time by innovation, betrayal, and finally, recognition. Photographers captured the moment not for corporate publicity but for historical record. The foundation would preserve this story in all its complexity, neither sanitizing its darker aspects nor allowing them to overshadow the creative brilliance they had almost extinguished. Later that night, as Maya helped Lucia into their apartment, her sister asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "What happens now? With you and Alexander?" Maya considered the question. Their lives had become inextricably linked through circumstances neither could have predicted. The foundation would connect them professionally for years to come. But there was something else, a mutual understanding. A shared experience of choosing truth over comfort that few others could comprehend. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "We're writing a new story now." The next morning, Maya returned to La Maison for the first time in months. She had resigned after the media frenzy made working there impossible, but Marcel had called asking if she would meet with him. As she entered the familiar space, memories flooded back, the weight of plates on her arms, the hum of conversations, and most vividly, the moment she had recognized Alexander Harrington and decided to speak her truth. Marcel greeted her with surprising warmth. "The new owner wants to meet you," he explained, leading her to the corner booth where everything had begun. Alexander waited there, a contract on the table before him. "I bought the restaurant," he said without preamble. "I'm converting it to a non-profit training facility for immigrant culinary students. I thought you might be interested in helping develop the program." Maya laughed, a genuine surprised sound. "You're full of unexpected moves these days. I learned from the best." He gestured to the booth. "This is where our story started. It seemed like the right place to begin the next chapter." Maya slid into the seat across from him, exactly as she had that first night as his server. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. "To new beginnings," Alexander said, offering his hand across the table. Maya took it, feeling the circle complete. A whispered name had brought down an empire built on lies. In its place, something authentic was taking root, a legacy neither of them could have imagined. Born from a single moment of courage in a corner booth diner. "To new beginnings," she agreed, "and to truth, whatever it costs."